Hello everybody, buonasera, benvenuto. I thought I'd practice my Italian. I get all these lovely emails from people who think that I'm really fluent in Italian. They write this exquisite Italian and all I can kind of say something back monosyllabically. So, I mean, yeah. Selamat datang if you've been to Indonesia recently. Who's been to Indonesia recently? Happen to know that. If you haven't been to a Rotunda night before, then you won't know that we always start a Rotunda night with exquisite music. And tonight, of course, it's someone who's been on this stage before and someone who hasn't. Caleb Garfinkel is a graduate of the VU Music School, both the TAFE and the Higher Ed, I believe. Is that right? Isn't that fantastic? Gone on to other things. He even sang at my dad's funeral last year, so I'm a bit touched by that. And Petra's here for the first time, who is Caleb's gorgeous singing partner, and maybe partner in other senses of the word too, but I'm just speculating.
Probation.
John isn't here to hear my stand-up comedy. I thought he'd be a bit impressed. And Bryan. Welcome, but I'll do that a little bit better in a moment. Could you please welcome Caleb Garfinkel and his partner Petra, who are going to do 3 beautiful ballads to warm up the night and get you in the groove. Give them a round of applause.
Well, after that introduction... So that's how you snare a man. So tonight we've got a couple of classics for you, which hopefully you'll know and love. And we'll also have an original track for you as well. Stars shining right above you. Night breezes seem to whisper, I love you. Birds singing in the sycamore tree. Dream a little dream of me. Sing nighty-night and kiss me. Just hold me tight and tell me you miss me. While I'm alone and blue as can be, dream a little dream of me. Stars fading, but I linger on, dear. Still craving your kiss. I'm longing to linger till dawn, dear. Just saying these sweet dreams till sunbeams find you. Sweet dreams that leave all worries behind you. But in your dreams, whatever they be, dream a little dream of me. Da-da-da, da-da. I get out of this? Wow. So the next song, some of you may know a French group called Nouveau Vague who take original 80s music that they've never heard and they turn it into something much better than it originally was. So here we have a song by Tuxedo Moon called In a Manner of Speaking. To say that just like you, I should find a way to tell you everything by saying nothing. In the manner of speaking, I don't understand how love in silence becomes reprimand. The way I feel about you is beyond words. Give me the words, give me the words that tell me nothing. Oh, give me the words, give me the words that tell me everything. Semantics won't do in this life that we live in. We can only make do, and the way that we feel might have to be sacrificed. So in a manner of speaking, I just have to say, just like you, I must find a way to tell you everything by saying nothing. And for this third song, we'd like to welcome Front of House Sound. Ooh. Never mind. So this is an original song that I wrote many, many years ago when I was very cynical about love before I met this one, because he's pretty rockin'.
wasn't meant to be like this, really.
It really wasn't.
Turn up and play the gig, go home, and no one would know.
All right. We totally are professional. Now I know I do nothing for you, just an empty gaze. Oh, how things have changed. I can see you feel nothing for me. Once so close, now estranged. Once so close, now we're strange. Emotions like apparitions, there's nothing really there. Another love goes to mourn for, another mismatched prayer. The flame has died, passion's subside. Gotta face these skeletons, descending has shown. These apparitions scare me 'cause they show me I'm alone. I can see you're not the one for me. I'm not the one for you, that much is true. Too complicated, too much going on in your head. So strange, not a single tear, not a single tear I shed. There's nothing really there. Another love goes to mourn for, another mismatched prayer. The flame has died, passion subside. Gotta face these skeletons, standing has shown. These apparitions scare me 'cause they show me I'm alone. Living parallel, our lives often do collide. But for one of us, feelings don't subside. We don't pretend, we don't bother trying to be friends. Cease all contact, a clean break, a definitive end. Emotions like apparitions, there's nothing really there. Another love goes to mourn for, another mismatched prayer. The flame has died, passion subside. I gotta fix these skeletons, descending has shown. These apparitions scare me 'cause they show me I'm alone. Emotions like apparitions, nothing really there. Another love goes to mourn for, another mismatched prayer. The flame has died, passion subside. Gotta face these skeletons, descending has shown. These apparitions scare me.
This is my gorgeous friend and co-host for tonight, teacher, dramaturg.
Here's my intro.
Just giving it to me now. Julianne O'Brien is a major influence in my emotional life. She has taught me to be emotionally literate and to be the consummate post-feminist Australian male. That's pretty good. I just made that up. She has taught the difficult art of comedy writing and her own musical. A gothic version of Pinocchio is being produced by the Malthouse in the 2012 season, and we have a bit of a relationship with the Malthouse. Could you please welcome my friend, teacher, dramatist, dramaturg, Julianne O'Brien, who's going to co-host tonight. This is the last Rotunda for 2011. Did you like the dramatic pause? I practiced that all day. I die without it, actually. There's a beautiful Irish poem. It's entitled Sometimes, and it's all about the theme of sometimes things actually don't go from bad to worse, that sometimes you actually do get what you hope for. So Rotunda is very much my little poem of getting what you want and having the exquisite pleasure of speaking to articulate, sensitive, intelligent, creative women like Julianne and sometimes the blokes behind me. We've entitled tonight Coming Back for Seconds, and I realised after I'd written it, sent it out, which I often do, that it had a kind of delightful ambiguity, that it might actually imply that they were really keen to get back to you, and I choose to believe that they are. As John walked in tonight, he mightn't want me telling this, but he kept saying, make sure you mix up the questions, take us somewhere different, we've told them everything we know. So I actually liked that little bit of anxiety, that he was concerned that you should get something really fresh and original. It is our last Rotunda for the year, as I said, and it's our 36th Rotunda over 3.5 years. And this was the brainchild of my boss, Susanna Bryson, who thought that if a writing department had dancing around at all these wonderful conversations and activity, it might actually draw people to wanting to do the course, and it's worked magnificently. We started the year with Bryan Dawe and Dawe Clarke, and we don't top and tail with the same guests, but the response was enormous, and I reckon because we couldn't fit most of the crowd in last time, people kept saying, you have to bring them back, and I pestered them all year. So would you really give it up for Bryan Dawe and Dawe Clarke, who've consented to come back a second time, which is very unusual. I really remember the applause last time they were here, and I don't know, it just felt really sustained, and I felt that there was a real love from the audience kind of towards them too. This time at the start of the year, I was actually pointing to where we were going to go, and now I'm going to point back to where Rotunda has been. Of course, we started with these two wonderful gentlemen. We've been on a poetry bus, a double-decker red bus with Kristen Henry and Tony Page, and we followed the Maribyrnong by moonlight and read to 80 people. We've been at the Whitten Oval talking footy right in the foyer there. We've been to the Brimbank Literary Festival, and we hosted John Marsden there. Hanny Rayson brought along Tony Jordan and Kate Holden in the VU bar next door, and we called the night the Three Amigas. We went to Wyndham for their August Arts, and Michael McGurr and Maureen McCarthy and Lucia Nardo came to that. And about 3 weeks ago, we had Arnold Zabel and Alice Pung actually talking to each other about their brand new books, which touched on similar themes, and no interview. And that was the first time we tried that kind of format. So tonight we're back to a more traditional format. It's not a Rotunda night unless I ask you to turn around, look at someone you don't know, shake their hand and tell them in 30 seconds why you've come tonight. Could you do that? Shake your hand to someone you don't know. I was talking to my new boss, who's the boss above Susanna today, Adam Hutra, who's in the audience too. And Adam used to head up the music department. Now he heads up our little writing department and the music department. He's here with his lovely wife too. He said to me, tell me what I need to know about tonight. And I think the first thing I said to him was, I think at every Rotunda, I say to people, who is new, get them to raise their hands. And I said, I'm sure, I'm not hallucinating, but I think a third of the audience is brand new every time. Who is here for the first time tonight? Wow. There you go, Adam Hutra, with your own. Adam's counting. Keep your hands up just for a moment. Beautiful. Really pleased to have you aboard, and I love the way people send the emails, and I know I pester you to death, and I know I'm a voracious, I don't know, whatever I am, but you all kind of are very patient with me, and thanks for bringing new people along. I just love the idea of people coming through here who've never been here before. Who has been to at least 5 Rotundas this year? We've actually started creating little badges saying, I'm a life member of Rotunda. And people actually want them. Alice Pung, the writer, has got one on her mantelpiece and she loves it to death. Who's travelled furthest to get here tonight? Where have you come from, sir? Wuriyoriong. Wuriyaluk. Yarra Valley. Corryong. We've got some people from Deakin University. Who are the Deakin people? They came in on the Trojan horse, didn't they? They kind of. Who's here from Melbourne Uni? Isn't that fantastic? You've all scuttled out of town and come over to us. Fantastic. Who's here from Monash? Wow, the trifecta. Fantastic. Thanks for coming. Tell your colleagues and everything about Rotunda in the West. I think we're going to do 10 more next year. Welcome to Angela Altair from the Williamstown Literary Festival. The Big West Festival has got a program coming up in November, and it's a literature program, and there are flyers up here. So, Angela, give us a wave, and if you want some, go to Angela and get some. There's a lot of wonderful people coming. The Willy Lit people have put something on. Deb Force from the Sun Bookshop has put something on. And there are books too in the foyer. There's a little bookshop. I said that last time, and people actually went outside and were looking for a real bookshop. I just mean it's a table with some books on it, which substitutes as a bookshop. Thanks for coming again. It's a great pleasure. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Julianne O'Brien, who's going to give these gentlemen the kind of introduction they deserve. Could you please welcome again Julianne O'Brien?
If you could please welcome Professor Dawe Clarke and Professor Bryan Dawe. We give up PhDs like lollies at VU, so you feel free. Have that one on us.
Bryan Dawe, what is your memory of being in this room 8 months ago?
What is my memory? It's always confronting to meet your audience. And it's you in between asking the questions, you're looking around and going, oh, I see. Yes, there's no one here under 20. We are. There you go. And also the fact that I really enjoyed it, because John and I had never done that before, had we? Sat down and, we talked a lot of crap on our own, but we'd actually never got an audience to listen to it. So that was good.
Why has no one else before thought of bringing you together like that? I mean, surely that must have been... No? Hasn't
well,
happened?
we get asked to do a few things that are sort of very often professional and highly paid. But if you wanted to make...
You mean our $300 is not quite...
If you wanted to make money in our business, you'd reject all the jobs we do and do all the jobs we reject.
Yeah.
Sounds like a John West ad, doesn't it? John, can I ask you about your... Because you've been actually... this is your third time.
The first time
Cheryl
I
Clarke
came out here, there was quite
a
a small crowd. We did it in a phone booth.
Yeah.
And then we've got a little bigger each time, and it's always very nice. It is nice to meet an audience. An audience is a very important thing, and one of the features of our period in radio and television is the changes that have been effected in radio and television. And radio and television doesn't fully understand, for example, the impact of online technology. They know it's there, they use it themselves, but they don't quite know how it's affecting what they do. And when you meet your audience, it's obvious how they are accessing stuff, and we need contact with our audience because our audience is the only ally we've got.
John, you rang me about 3 days after having been there, which was a terribly sweet thing to do, and I was really bowled over by it. But I got the feeling that in your own laconic way you were trying to say, I think your audience out there is terrific, and I think what you're doing over there is terrific. What's your sense of why people coming together is important in this way?
One of the most subtle invitations I've ever heard to engage in open flattery in front of the tertiary education sector.
My bosses are here.
It's not showing, Bruno. It's not showing.
I think it is a very interesting thing you're doing. I think that from our point of view, it's a very, and I would imagine the other writers would say the same thing. It is a terrific thing to be able to talk to your audience. You can do it at something like the Melbourne Writers' Festival or at a Wheeler Centre event or something, and there are similarities here. In this case, you have the advantage of the focus that your programs have got on writing as a kind of groundswell for perhaps some questions. So I think it's perhaps a bit more purposeful. It's certainly a nice thing to do, I think, from our point of view, because you get people who are genuinely interested, and I hope later that they will be asked if they've got any questions. And I always think too that somewhere in the world is is the young people that Bryan and I once were, who
When we
didn't
started.
quite.
When we first started.
No, before that. I mean, when you're wondering,
that's right.
when you're
I
wondering
don't remember
whether,
before that, John.
when you're wondering what to do with your life and when to do it, and you need some confidence. And I think anything that makes people a bit confident about the self-expression and creative program, anything is a good thing.
You said last time you were out here that... Sorry, did I interrupt your pause? Yeah. Thanks. You said that you and Bryan were the barnacles on the ship ABC. Are you still barnacling well?
We are. I don't know about the ship.
The ship's taking in water,
Well,
I
the
think.
ship basically...
The rats are jumping, are they?
Well, when I first started working at the ABC, in order to get anything on the ABC, you went in and had to speak to people who made programs, and they worked out whether to include what you were suggesting either in the programs or get you to come in and occupy those desks over there and make the program you were describing. The ABC now makes no programs that don't come out of the News and Current Affairs department, so anything else you see is made by an outside production company. Most of them feature desks. Because that's a relatively cheap way to make television. It's to do with the economics. It's the renting of a studio for a certain time, say a day, and you make maybe 5 programs, and that's a week of programmable material. So that's partly to do with the economics. And a lot of other programs, and a lot of those programs are made by outside production companies, and the dramas obviously are, and the documentaries are, and everything else is. So Bryan and I are still somehow hanging on to the News and Current Affairs department, so we don't have to go through the sort of processing that goes on with everything else, which is a good thing because we haven't had to kill anybody.
It implies a certain tenacity to or a certain grimness about holding on. Is that the case?
No, we've just been around the traps for a while, and we know how to, when we see them coming, because you have these people called program prevention officers who are based at the Talent Eradication Unit up in Sydney, and John and I have seen them come and go in various forms over a long period of time, and you've got to be able to box a bit clever around them, and we try and...
Are you guys thick-skinned? Because I lasted in television 3 months, I think. But do you have to be thick-skinned?
You have to be a wee bit thick-skinned. You have to be useful to the program. I mean, we're not going to stay on that program if we stop being useful to it. You know, they need to know that we can be relied on, that we are reasonably cost-effective. We can't go in there, for example, and say we want to take 6 hours to make 3 minutes of television. We need to
you've
be
got
able...
a desk and no costumes.
Yeah, that's right. We need to go in there and basically conduct a commando raid, and they need to trust us to do that, and they need to know that if we do an interview with the Prime Minister and they then an hour later get the Prime Minister to come in, they would prefer maybe to do us doing someone else. They need to know that they've got us doing someone else because we've looked after that. So we need to... It's symbiosis, but you need to do that now.
Didn't you say, John, last time that you often have to prepare 3 different sketches?
We partly do that for our own benefit because we sometimes don't know which one's going to be funnier.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll do the same interview twice or 3 times, and take 2 is funnier, and it's exactly the same words, because in the case of take 2 it had rhythm or something. A lot of it's rhythm. A lot of discourse is rhythm. And a lot of people who write really good dialogue write good rhythms. They write almost musically.
Could we go back to laying shit on the ABC?
Yeah,
I didn't think we'd finished that one properly.
We didn't dare
No,
hope
we were
you'd
talking
go
about the
there.
sinking
It's
ship,
great.
and I just think that it has to be said public, and I'd like to think everybody in this room would do something about it as well. But the idea that the ABC could get rid of Ramona Kamval on the book program is appalling. And if you didn't think the ABC was in trouble, that's showing it. So if you haven't complained, do it tomorrow if you wouldn't mind, because that is outrageous that that woman has been taken off that program, or that Peter Mears, for example, has to reapply for his job, and that's before we get to the arts department, isn't it? And what they've done there. Anyway, I'm finished now.
No, good. No, get it off your chest. Get it off your chest.
Does that mean you proceed without any great expectation? You go, I'll just take it literally a year at a time and see where this goes?
Yeah. Well, I think when we decide we've had enough, we will. And there's been a couple of times with this government, I got to tell you, trying to stay awake's not been easy. But you know, John, because John writes the script, the initial script, and sometimes I sat there and I wonder at him. I think he's fantastic, and he's a wonder to be able to come up with something. Because
it's a great skill to transmute a whole lot of old army gags into political satire.
I was being kind, John. I was trying not to go there. I was talking about your genius, not
Thank you, Brian.
the boom jokes that arrived occasionally.
So, Brian, do you understand the talent? I mean, do you understand how it works, or do you understand where it comes from? Having watched it for so long, are you still kind of amazed at where it comes from?
I wouldn't have a clue how he does it. I just turn up and do my bit. No, of course I do. And it's because of what he does and how much it's observed, I suppose, that you now can... I look at the script and I know exactly where the beats are and where the rhythms are, because I know John's writing backwards, and I can always tell when it's not John's writing is when I pick up another script and you think, God, how did they write that like that? That's all wrong. Too many words, no full stops and no rhythm. And that's why we can do it in such a quick time, because I don't have to mess around in the dark. I just pick it up and it's after how many years it is?
112.
I know, you sort of start to know what you're doing a bit.
Well, he's underselling himself a bit. We very often have a conversation before I write anything, and a lot of what we do is to do with form, and Brian's a great understander of form, and sometimes within a couple of minutes you can use 3 or 4 forms. It looks like one because it looks like the interview format. 2 middle-aged chaps in suits in those 2 shots, which is what television's very often about. So, in a way, we're using the grammar of television. We're doing that judo thing where you're supposed to be able to throw someone using their power.
That's right, yes.
So there's an element of it, we're adopting their form, but linguistically there can be 2-line exchanges which are a slightly different form, and which we then...
It is. It's
then we can change and stuff.
What you do.
And that's just very good fun. And I don't think it's unlike the way people do. People do...
You mean how people play with each other verbally on a daily basis? Yeah. There's something really fresh and... Like, you guys look like you still enjoy it, and you've been doing it for decades.
Yeah, no, it's good fun.
Yes.
It's, it is a bit heavy sledding sometimes when, you've stuck with doing, Wayne Swan or...
Yeah, exactly. Can I ask about that? We'll dive into the political satire because it's the obvious topic for tonight. You guys have been doing it through the uninspiring times. We've got The Chaser. My 17-year-old daughter told me this afternoon, The Chaser's been good to get young people interested in politics. I thought, that's an interesting observation. They've got interested in politics through the satire. You guys have been satirising politics through many different stages, and there's an argument that now we have this professional politician, not like the big characters, Keating who'd call someone a scumbag, or, they were laid bare, they were big personalities.
Be still my beating heart.
Yeah, me too.
Because I'm going to do you, son.
Me too. I'm going to do you slowly. I mean, who can forget these great lines? But now we've got your Julia Gillard, who promising she's giving us
sorry,
the real
I'll just you have to go on YouTube. I love YouTube purely because you can go back and look at Keating's old... I don't know, has anyone here seen the one when Alexander took over that week as opposition leader? It is magnificent. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I could do this all night. I love Keating.
Of course, he's got curly hair in those days, and he hates Keating, pathologically hates Keating. So it starts off...
This is Alexander Downer.
Yeah. And he's only been in the job 2 days, and Keating walks out and he goes, "Hey, Acting Madam Deputy Speaker, have a look at this, eh?" And he's waving a newspaper around. He's got Downer to unite Liberals. Hey, Downer to unite Liberals. How's it going over there, Curly? And it cuts to Downer, the former Minister for Being Abroad. Cuts to Downer and he's furious. And he's going, just like, and he comes back, "Hey, what are you going to do, Curly? Me old dear, hey?" Comes back, "You are the most despicable person to ever walk into this parliament." "Yeah, good on you. And they cut back to Keating, he's got a fishing rod. Hey? Hey, Madam Deputy Speaker, hey, they're not just one salmon jumping on the bait here, we've got 3 of them over here. Have a look at them. It's priceless.
It is. It's absolutely priceless. I like.
Sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted.
Oh, no. I know. I've got another one. I like the line when he describes John Hewson's parliamentary performance as being flogged by a warm lettuce.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
But I mean, have we got those characters now, or are they playing this professional? They're not exposing themselves, so they're less open to satire. Or let's face it, they're always open to satire.
Well, I think that there's a distinction to be made between the politicians themselves and the ideas in politics and the ideas they're representing. And our material would be sometimes about what somebody has done. Like I was thinking about Alan Joyce last week because we...
Why?
Because you could... If you're doing Alan Joyce, you could address the ideas that are alive in that issue, which are about industrial relations and PR and all that. But it would be hard not to do some kind of ad hominem argument somewhere along the line and pick the possibility that what he announced was that he wanted to run an airline that was owned by Australians and which Australians trusted, and he wanted a good deal for all the workers, and he announced that. But because no one can understand what he said, the airline was stood down because it was...
Well, they worked it out.
Not what he said at all. But generally speaking, we shouldn't be about the people at all. We should be about the ideas and about...
It's issues that feed satire.
Yeah,
isn't
I think
it?
so. I think
and I know
is.
you guys moved probably. Did you start off only doing political satire, and then you moved more generally, where you'll do church leaders?
Well, we'll do. And we need to mix it up a bit.
No,
if we can get off
Paul.
the politics, we often seize the day. If we can do sport or some other metaphor crops up, we will grab it because we are condemned to use the model a little bit. But we should be about ideas in the same sense that an argument is about the ideas. We should, in fact, we should be responsible for the argument we're making because we don't, we're not members of a party or anything. We don't have some flag we're waving. We should be critiquing what's going on. And the reason that Keating was interesting was that he is a wonderful user of language and he jumped well beyond. I mean, there was a show a while ago called Keating the Musical.
So brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, it was good fun, and I had a little bit to do with it. And I was standing in the bar one night, and he was standing next to me, and he didn't much like us at the time, and but we were sardined together in this bar. He said hello, and I said hello. I said, it's not bad, is it, when you can stay at your hotel and you can pop out in the evening and have a beautiful meal and then go and see an absolutely brilliant show about yourself. And he said, it's a great country, John.
He got me back one night. It was at Alan Ramsey's farewell dinner in Canberra, and I just did a gig as my character somewhere up the road, and I knew this was on. There was a gathering, so I fronted up, and every journo in Canberra was there. And I saw Keating standing over talking to this little gnome who I gathered was head of a department or something in Canberra. They all have little beards and about 5'1". And you could just see the boredom. 5'2" he would have been.
5'2".
Yeah. Not Italian.
Keep going.
Not
Keep
Italian.
going.
Mi dispiace.
Yeah.
And so I wandered over and I thought, well, this is the only chance I'm probably ever going to meet him. So I just wandered over. I said, am I interrupting? And he looked at me and he said, no, stick around, son, you might learn something.
Bryan and John, is it exhausting having to bring your wit and your observation to a process that must sometimes get you down, that must sometimes be tedious? Where do you get the stamina to keep wanting to observe and to interpret and to collect and to harvest all that's going on? What's that like?
Yours, John?
Well, I think a kind of sceptical point of view, if that's what we can be said to represent, it comes from a sort of disappointed optimist. I think there is a sense that you wish the thing worked better. I mean, society needs models, it needs structures, and we all want them to work better. We all get irritated when they fail, and especially when they fail for some very obvious reason, which has neither not been pinpointed or people aren't told about, or there's a dishonesty or an inequity or something. So I think you couldn't be interested if you just thought everybody's a dickhead.
Yeah.
And you couldn't be interested if you thought nobody's a dickhead. And the other thing that I rather like about it is that in a democracy, the notion is that you have a say and you determine the government. And in our case, we are.
I think that must be the key of your longevity. The fact that you can in all conscience say, I'm doing okay, I'm doing the right thing.
Well, no, I mean, you say you're the Minister for Health or something or other, and I assume the Minister for Health is a person like me who's capable of being smart sometimes, dumb other times, embarrassed, tripping over. So if I do those things and I'm pretending to be that person, then I'm humanising the thing. But I'm also saying they're going to make really stupid mistakes, and it doesn't always mean they're bad people. If they are complete idiots and consistently idiots, then we end up not doing them anymore because there's nothing much to say. I mean, how are you going to... If you tried to analyse Tony Abbott's critique...
On the tip of my tongue.
Well, if you tried to analyse his view of environmental science, you're not going to be occupied for terribly long. Because it's not very... It's not worthy of any analysis. It's just reasonably flat earth crap.
The American satirist Will Rogers once said, "It's not hard being a satirist when you have the entire government working for you." But I think it's, if you look back over the last 22, 3, 4 years, it is becoming harder now, I think, to be...
Do you? Yeah.
Because, I mean, the fact of the matter is they're satirising themselves better than we can. And, in fact, John and I were talking about going to the ACCC and having them all charged under the Restrictive Trade Practices Act for encroachment on our satirical...
Well, the other thing is also that once upon a time, in the 60s, for example, the Prime Minister, and that's when I was sort of growing up in the 50s and 60s, the Prime Minister wouldn't appear on television. The Prime Minister was a bit busy running the country to appear on television. And now the Prime Minister's a bit busy being on television to run the country. And it's a complete change. So by definition, one of our subject matters in addressing politics is the medium in which these messages are promulgated, which is very often television. So part of our subject is television.
The medium is the message.
Yeah, it is. And so you need to understand what the mechanics are of television, how it best works. And you can see that some people have been media trained, and if we're dealing with somebody who's been very obviously media trained, then we'll be very obviously media trained. We'll be astonishingly obviously media trained.
Like Tony Abbott and his sound bites, his little phrases.
Well, I saw a thing the other day that in the paper about the fact that surf clubs in Australia are having to deal with the fact that they're going to have to move because the coast is shifting, and some of them, and most of them are on the coast.
It's a bit of a giveaway, isn't it?
Most successful ones.
Yeah, the better ones are.
Springs back to all right.
And so this is a serious issue, and some of them have already moved, and most of them are addressing the possibility that they're going to have to move. And I rang somebody at a well-known Melbourne newspaper and said, why in printing that story, why don't you put a photograph next to it of a man wearing Speedos, indicating what people look like when they just get out of the surf? Thinking, well, you must have some nice shots of Tony.
Yeah.
And he would look good next to a story about how all surf clubs are going to have to move because of global warming.
Yeah.
He'd be the perfect photograph.
Great idea. You're helpful. You're being helpful.
Yeah, I was helping. But anyway, the point I'm making is that it's not, what we do is not all about, trying to oppose all politicians all of the time. A lot of it's about television, and a lot of it is about, in the case of Keating, it was a celebration of language a lot of the time because he was so good at it. Bob Hawke was good at it too.
Yeah, another one.
So it does vary, but it very often is to do with forms, and I think quite a lot of writing is to do with forms, and certainly a lot of performance is to do with forms, because the thing an audience wants to know when it's looking at something, and I know this because I'm come from the audience, I have absolutely no training of any kind. So I want to know when I'm looking at something, what is it that I'm looking at? And the signifiers of that in an interview on television are very quick and they're very efficient.
Yeah, you found an enormous amount of creative freedom within that structure of the interview.
And people notice the slightest things.
Yeah, but they enjoy the deviations from, because we hear the interview many, many times a day, so they enjoy your playful.
And they notice everything.
Bryan, you're a performer, you're a photographer, you write scripts, you write the letters from Kalangadoo, you've created characters, you've done a whole range of things, like you're the complete package in many ways. Dorothy Hewitt, the Australian writer, said, if I didn't have my creative outlet, I think I'd almost go mad. Tell me about your creativity and what it means to you personally and that ability to express yourself in so many different ways.
Well, I mean, the first thing, I'm absolutely honoured and privileged to have got to the point where someone actually pays me to do it. So at that point, that's a wonderful thing. And I think Dorothy Hewitt's probably right. It's a bit like writing or being creative is like swimming. If you don't do it, you drown. And I could imagine that's where I would be if I couldn't do it. I couldn't think of anything worse than having a day where I wasn't allowed to be creative, even if I'm not being creative. The thought of being creative is the thing that keeps you going. And what that creativity is to me depends on how I'm feeling at the time. Sometimes it's photography, sometimes it's writing. I perform every week and do other performings elsewhere away from what John and I do. So in that regard, I get my performance hit probably at least once a week, and live audience at least a few times, 3 or 4 times a month. So I love that, and I love going from the studio, which is you can fix anything, to scaring the shit out of yourself standing in front of an audience, knowing you've got 30 minutes to stand in front of 500 or 600 people and hold them. And that's a different thing.
And that fear never leaves you?
Oh, no, the fear, no, you've got it just before you walk on. Once I'm out there, I'm fine, but until you walk on.
And even tonight, where you didn't have to actually script anything, were you still a little bit nervous out there?
Oh, you're always going to be a little bit nervous. You never ever, personally, I would never take it for granted of the audience. I never take an audience for granted. I learnt that once. And you only take an audience for granted once. And so I devised a little intro that told me exactly where my audience were in terms of picking up on stuff. And it's never failed me. And the one night I thought it had, I walked out there and the intro was right and Bryan was wrong. And I nearly died because I wasn't prepared. So there's that stuff like that. You know.
John, your creativity and what it means to you at a really basic level in terms of who you are and that, would you go mad without that expressive kind of ability to do what you do?
Probably. I have always been interested in the creative impulse. That's where it's a common feature, I think, in most of my friends. It's what we share. I think probably my task when I was in my 20s was how you make a living out of it. Because if I hadn't been able to make a living out of it, I'd have to have done something else. And I wouldn't have not done this. I just wouldn't have been able to do it for a living. I would have still have done it.
What would you have done?
I don't know. But
sports, something.
I don't know what I'd have done. But I would always, I wouldn't undervalue something I couldn't make a living out of. It was important to me. But I was going to be able to diversify and learn a lot more if I could make a living out of it, because Darwin's right. You need to adapt and you need to vary and you need to throw your spore quite a long way away and all that. You've got to really try some stuff.
Spore? That got a giggle.
And they're a rough crowd here. But when you're young in this business, just in a nutshell, you really sort of start as a performer. Your first instinct is the performer instinct. And when I was 16 or something, if somebody had said it'll be funny if you jump off that building, I'd have jumped off the building. By the age of 18, I'd worked out that if you write down that someone else jumps out of the building, then it's a hell of a lot easier on your head.
Yeah.
But how you make a living is hard too. It's not easy because
But you never sold out. You said there's two types
yes,
of
I did. No, you mustn't. No, let me clear that up. I've sold out. I've done everything. I've done everything you need to do to sell out. I've done what Bryan was saying. You do certain things once. I've done a lot of things once.
Really?
Yeah, I've done a whole lot of things.
You said you'd never do 20 minutes at Hitler's inauguration.
Yeah, I think you've got to draw the line somewhere.
18 minutes. But
No, I've done.
Can you give us an example, John, of something you've done that you...
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of something you've done that
Oh,
you
well,
think...
I've done...
Shall we hold hands, John?
I come from further than 5 hours away, which the man down here had come from. I come from New Zealand. And in New Zealand in the 14th century, when I was young, I did national tours, cabaret stuff, commercials, I did endorsements, I did everything I possibly could. I had to make a living. I was on television once a week for about a minute, and you got paid $30 a time. And I couldn't make a living doing that.
You had something like 98% complete recognition in New Zealand. There was like one guy who didn't know who you were.
That's right. The more successful, the more recognisable you are, the more times you get paid the $30 a week. But it's still $30 a week. And so what I needed to do, learn quickly, was that television is a visibility machine, but you often can't make your living there. You need to sell a T-shirt or something. And if you can, and I've done all that too. I've done everything you think I haven't done. But I very often did things because I needed to learn, and I eventually worked out that if it's at all possible, I'd like to not occupy the whole spectrum of mainstream entertainer. I'd like to occupy that molecule of it there. And that's what I...
And thank God.
Well, that's what I have tried to do.
Writing.
But it's not because I wanted to go there in the first place and was wise. It's because I banged into a lot of stuff and thought, geez, this gives me
We
the
need
irrits.
writers. We need good writers.
Yeah, and actually there aren't many places that train writers, and you need to learn these things yourself, and you need to be the teacher as well as the learner. There aren't a lot of examples. I mean, the people, the writers I've admired who... If you ask me the writers I've read in my life who I hope something of them has gone into me, there are probably 3.
I reckon I know
one. Oh, do you?
Spike.
Spike would be one, yeah. And the other 2 would be Flann O'Brien and Robert Benchley. But it's because I had an affinity with them, and they sort of, the book kind of, as Auden says, you don't read a book reads you. And their books winked at me while they were reading me.
Can we talk about the Australian story? Obviously, it's so cheap to import stories from America. What about the Australian film industry, do you feel? What's your diagnosis on the health of the Australian film industry in terms of Australian stories? We've got Red Dog at the moment that seems to be doing well in the box office, which is great to see, but gee, there's just one red dog and there's a lot of turkeys. What do you think, both of you think about the industry?
I'm not sure I have a definitive opinion about the Australian movie industry. I think the thing that still makes me cringe when I watch potentially a good film that's shot beautifully, acted superbly and whatever, and the dialogue will just be dumb and badly written. And for the life of me, I can't work out why we've never set up a national screenwriting school, which a lot of people have talked about doing, just to train people actually about dialogue and how dialogue works. There are some fabulous examples. The Americans do this stuff brilliantly. And, for example, I'll throw something that I've seen recently, The Town, which Ben Affleck directed, wrote and was in it. And I had to reappraise Ben after that because I thought it was a brilliant film, and particularly because of the dialogue. And he got the space that he was working in that part of America, and he got the dialogue perfectly.
And you do that with your monologues. The language you're capturing with the letters from Kalangadoo, it's like it becomes an archive. You know, that language, the way you're using language, your children may not speak that way, and their children they don't, and you've captured that.
Well, that was partly the reason why I did it.
Yeah.
Because I had a sense that when I left Port Adelaide, after my generation died off, that would be the last time you'll hear that language. It's still there. It's in Newcastle. It's still in certain types of Australian towns, but I think once the boomers go, that's probably the end of that language, because they were the last recipients of it from their grandparents, if not their parents. And that's where that language comes from. It comes from the Depression. And, yeah. So.
Do you feel, John, about the Australian story, it's in danger, or...?
Well, I think the writing is paramount. I think Brian's right. I think we have wonderful technicians in the Australian film and television industry. I think the writing very often... remember that a few years ago, Alan Bennett, the English writer, proposed an idea to the BBC, who had a few bob at the time and were making quite a lot of drama, and they rejected the idea and they said, it's just talking heads, Alan. And he said, well, television does 3 or 4 things really well, and one of them actually is talking heads. And they said, well, we don't want, we've got...
Do people know Talking Heads by Alan Bennett? The most brilliant monologues written in the last
they dismissed it. Anyway, a few years later, they found themselves in a slightly more post-Thatcherite budgetary environment, and they rang him up and they said, that thing you brought to us one time, is it still around, and could we make it? And he said, yes, we could. We'll make it on one condition: it must be called Talking Heads.
And look, it had a desk and hardly any costumes.
Yeah, and it's really is the writing. It's in the writing. And we don't, as Brian says, we don't place, I don't know whether it's sufficient or, I don't know. I don't think there's a lot of, in order to have a really good writing strand in Australian film, you'd need a really good writing strand in Australian television. And in order to have that, you'd probably need a really good writing strand in Australian radio. If you looked at if you look at the way the British developed theirs, for example, these things are linked. It's not. What we've got here is a producer-driven industry, and when they know what'll work, you give me a call.
I mean, the thing with radio, with what John was hinting at there, is if you take, for example, Peter Cook, Spike Milligan, Alan Bennett, name them all started on radio, all wrote without a camera to play with, so they had to paint pictures for you. But more importantly, and Alan Bennett I think is just the most magnificent example of it, is the dialogue comes out of the character instead of it being imposed over the top of it. And far too much, I think, with Australian films is that you'll get a character, but the voice doesn't come from the character. It's someone writing pieces of dialogue to move the story along. And that is so boring, because it gives itself away immediately, and then you start to lose interest.
Well, also people don't always say what they mean, and in fact they often say the opposite of what they mean, and Bennett gets tone, so that if somebody says, how are you, and somebody says, and they're perfectly well, they'll often say, oh, not bad. If they're sick, they'll say, oh, good, really good, So very often they won't say, some people will, but it varies. There is not one way of doing it, the simplest things. And
then there's the rich language of subtext, what's underneath the text itself.
And then there's the pause before saying it, and then etc. It's just so rich and so wonderful, and people do it all the time. The way that the Australian film industry works at the moment is a little bit like a very big insurance company. You've got a huge bureaucracy, and their job is to lay off risk.
Brian, can we talk about character and the voice that comes from that character? I want to segue into Rolly Parks. Tell us about, did you get Rolly Parks first, and then you knew that once you had him as a character, you knew what you would write through him, or how did that come about?
Well, it started out very strangely, because I was living in Melbourne and met an actress from Adelaide called Jodie Seidel, who ironically came from literally a football kick away from where I lived in Port Adelaide, in a little place called Semaphore, up the road. And Jodie, when I first met Jodie, she broke into this old grandma voice. And to this day, Jodie Seidel has the best old woman's voice you'll ever hear. And when she goes into it, I just completely forget Jodie and I see her grandma. So we hit it off and creatively started working together. And then we came up with these 2 characters. And Rolly Parks, if anyone ever came from Adelaide would know, it used to be a speedway.
How does he talk?
He talks like that. Yeah, no, he's all right. How you going, John?
Yes.
Yeah, nice to see you, son. Yeah, my mum's voice. If my mum was alive now, you'd pick her straight away that it was Rolly, but she never got the Rolly stuff. She'd go, because she grew up with it all, she'd go, that's supposed to be funny, is it? And she'd go, no, it's all right. How you going, John? Yeah, nice to see you, son. Yeah, my mum's voice. If my mum was alive now, you'd pick her straight away that it was Rolly, but she never got the Rolly stuff. She'd go, because she grew up with it all. She'd go, that's supposed to be funny, is it? And you go, yeah, Mum. Oh, yeah. Which bit? So anyway, yeah, we started doing that and we realised we had these two characters. Then we were just playing on a tape recorder. And then one day I took it down to Triple R, where I think John's early stuff was. And thank God they played it. And away
How did
we went.
the letter format come?
Oh, the letter came later.
Okay.
That was a long time later. Jodie and I broke up and we decided she wanted to do other things. Fine. So I kept her character of Sonia Parks and I divorced them. And seeing that I was going through my own divorce at the time, it was pretty handy, really, to have a vehicle by which to have your say, I think the term is. And as long as my former wife, dear friend, didn't go near a lawyer, everything was going to be fine, and didn't listen to the ABC, nobody would worry. But that's how it happened. So I wrote these letters. What happens, for the people who don't know him, he ends up writing a letter once a week called Letter from Clakre to his gay son, Jean, who lives in London with Ahmed, who's a former Moroccan ballet dancer. I went to Woodville High, what can I say? This is what happens. So I started doing that.
I'm wondering why couldn't Bryan Dawe, write a weekly radio letter as himself and have a look at all these kind of issues and all the things? Why go into a character and then use him? And does it paradoxically give you more freedom to explore a wider range?
No, there's a really simple answer to this. I left school at 15. And my grammar today is as bad as it was when I left school at 15. And I wrote from the street. Rowley's stuff comes from the street. And that way I couldn't get into any trouble because nobody could question how people spoke in Port Adelaide because I knew. And all I was frightened of was anyone picking me up for my grammar, which I didn't have. And it was interesting because one day I was teaching some Indigenous people in writing, and they could tell the story, fabulous story, and then I wanted them to write it, and they had a problem. And then I realised it was the same problem I had, and I said, hey, I can't write. I don't know anything about, past participles or, I would have a clue. And I said, so just write it in your voice. And then I told them what I did with Rowley, and they got it. And,
So you get the microphone out and the tape recorder and...
Yeah, that's all I did, yeah.
And speak it.
Yeah.
And how did you know where you wanted to go and what themes you were going to touch upon?
Well, already, going back to this character, one of the things of having, as John would know with Fred Dagg, having a character that's been around for a long time, like Sir Murray Rivers, I've had 15 years, I suppose, both of them, you build up a bank of how they think, what their opinions, everything. So after a while, you just know what they think. And I can't explain it beyond that. And so you really, and particularly with Rowley, you're milking your past and taking issues that are very current today, but putting them through his tunnel.
But you touch upon death, you touch upon separation, you touch upon swimming with dolphins and all sorts of things, don't you?
Yeah.
There's, in a sense, permission to go everywhere too.
Well, it is and the reason for that is because I told the ABC at no point should this be called comedy. And because ever, John and I, one of the things I loved about John...
They've got a department for that.
Yeah, they've got a department. Please, because the moment you say this is funny and this is comedy to your audience, you've just lost half of them, because your audience will decide whether it's funny or not, and that's all you ask for. I wanted the freedom to be sad sometimes, and to make, if people cried when they heard it, so be it.
Could you set up the Bull Divine one and do a reading for us too from it? Do you mind? In character?
Spontaneous.
Would you like to hear from Rowley Parks? Yes.
I should point out, because this follows on my work, you were saying this was a true story. I had 6 uncles who worked on the wharf at Port Adelaide, and they all, after one, died. And as they got down to 3, then 2, but as the third last died, he sat in the hospital, and the last thing he said was to the other brothers, could you get over there? He said, get me trousers, will you? Yeah, it comes out and he says, a bit of money in there. He said, how much? Oh, about $100. What do you want us to do, says the other 2 brothers. Race 3, number 6, Cheltenham. And the bugger won. Anyway, this was the story my mum told a few weeks later after he died, and they buried his ashes in the Port River. And when she rang me to tell me, I was crying, but I was crying laughing at the story because I thought it was pretty funny. And she's going, "That you can't, he's your uncle." Anyway, I changed the names to protect the innocent. This is called Burying Bull Divine. Port Adelaide, Thursday. Dear Jean, how are you, son? "Oh, I'm all right, yeah, sort of. Been a bit of a sad week for us. Yeah, me old mate Bull Divine passed on Thursday, so I'm here in Adelaide for the funeral. Strange how it happened too, he died of a heart attack suddenly. Yeah, Lorne and him were about to go to the bingo and Bull just popped into the toilet before they left and he dropped dead on the toot. Just like that. At least he went quick though. I don't know if I'd want to call to me maker while I was sitting on the throne. Well, it doesn't matter, does it, Jean? I mean, your number's up, I suppose. It doesn't matter where it happens. Still, I think I'd like to be in me pyjamas, you know, and if in bed if possible, less embarrassing. But then it was typical of Bull to drop dead in a lavatory. He was always doing the unexpected. Anyway, they held the funeral on Monday and we buried him the day before yesterday in the river at the port. Well, we didn't actually bury him. He was cremated and he wanted his ashes scattered down the Port River where he grew up. So Lorne asked Jack Sampson, Shagger Price and myself if we'd scatter the ashes. Oh, Gene, we had a bugger of a time getting rid of him too. I mean, looking back on it, I mean, you shouldn't laugh, but I know, geez, even Bull would have laughed if he'd been there. Well, he was there, but I mean, if he was there and he was alive, he would have laughed. Talk about a bloody comedy of errors, Gene. We head off down the port on the bus carrying Bull in the little box, you see, and then we pick up the dinghy we're renting at the Birkenhead Wharf and off we go. Well, of course, we get out into the river and it's blowing a bloody gale out there. Anyway, Jack and I are trying to keep the boat upright while Shagger's trying to toss Bull's ashes in. Trouble is, Shagger's got a problem. Every time he throws a bit of Bull into the river, a bit of Bull blows back at us, you see, all over our coats and in our hair, and Christ, we didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I mean, we all tried to be a bit solemn. After all, it was sad, but I'm afraid when some of the ashes blew back on us and Jack the silly bugger turned to me and says, "Hey, Roll, I think Bull's having second thoughts. Like he wants to come home with us." Well, I tell you what, that did it laugh. I tell you how we kept that bloody dinghy upright, still got me beat. Anyway, we calmed ourselves down eventually. We had to, it was getting dark and we still had half of Bull's ashes in the box. Anyway, we had a meeting and we decided that given the way the wind was carrying on, the only way we're going to get rid of Bull completely was to chuck the box with the ashes into the river. This is what we did. Well, Jean, that's all right, except we get back and tell Lorne this and told her what we'd done and she gets real upset. Apparently Lorne wanted to keep the box and stick it on the mantelpiece above the fire. Memory of him. Well, we didn't know that. Anyway, the upshot was the three of us had to go and hire the bloody dinghy again the next morning. We found it eventually, the little container. It had washed up on a little beach downstream and Shagger hauled it in with a fishing rod. But talk about three young boys getting themselves into trouble. What happened was, it must have been just after dawn when we started looking for the damn thing. We couldn't have been there 10 minutes when out of the blue comes the bloody police launch. Pulls up next to us and wants to know what we're up to. Three blokes in a dinghy with one fishing rod between them at that time of the morning looked a bit suspicious. And of course, silly bloody Jack doesn't help. He tells the wallopers we're looking for a box that our mate was in when we got rid of him the day before. Bloody idiot. Anyway, it was only after the wallopers got Lorne on the phone to verify the story they'd let us go. Anyway, I better get a move on because we're catching the bus back to Kalangadoo tonight and Jack Shagger and I are going up the hospital to see Lionel Cameron before we leave. He's been a bit crook. We're going to cheer him up. As Jack said to me, we don't want to be renting that bloody dinghy again for a while, Roll. Anyway, so I better go. Give me regards to Robert Helpman and write when you can. Lots of love, your dad.
Bryan Dawe.
Thank you.
John Clarke, do you still write letters?
Letters, yeah.
You
Well,
write
I write letters. Well, sort of emails these days, but I did always like writing letters. I think writing letters was probably my writing training. I used to wonder what my writing training was. I used to think, where did I get this interest in writing? And I always did write letters. And
why does it work as training?
Because I think in a good letter there is a particularity about the relationship between the writer and the recipient, and I think an understanding of that helps greatly in I suppose generating the confidence to regard the community as the recipient.
Did you ever write letters to real estate agents and people you didn't like?
No.
I used to love doing that. But John's right, it's a form of writing. So
it is a form.
Spend days writing these vicious letters to these horrible real estate agents that were running the house I was renting. And they'd print them sometimes, which was very funny. And so it was a form of...
Well, it's a form too. It is a form, and you need to understand the form in order to do pretty well anything. I just thought of a good example of something I was saying earlier, if I can go back about people not quite saying what they mean, was that I was in the car recently and I heard Tim Rice being interviewed, and Tim Rice was being interviewed about his long collaboration with Andrew Lloyd Webber. And he was asked why they stopped writing together. They had these huge hits, whatever they were, Godspell and stuff, and then
Jesus Christ Superstar
and Cats, yeah. And then Webber went on and had even more great, huge drivel of his own. And Tim Rice said, well, why did you stop writing together? And he said, put yourself in this position. You're writing shows with somebody. You're writing about half each. They're extremely successful. It's going well. And suddenly you realise that the other person is getting down on the lion's share of the money and all of the women. And he said, you probably wouldn't like it, and neither did Andrew.
John, you can't leave that story without telling him your little story about playing golf with Peter Cook one day, and
which?
And you asked him about where he got all his money from, something indiscreet that.
He said. Well, that was an example of not saying exactly what you mean. What he's done there is that he's gone to the police lineup and fingered the wrong bloke. But Tim Rice. He's shown you exactly what the problem was, but he's identified the wrong man. The Peter Cook one was that Peter Cook somewhere along the line made a fair bit of money, and he invested it in stage shows. And I said to him, how do you do that? And he said, well, what they do is they put a show on. Somebody writes a show and they get a cast and they stick it on in a place like Bristol. And they tow everybody up there, you go up there for the night, and they put on dinner and stuff, and people go and see this show, and they're basically trying to raise money to put the show on in the West End or take it around the world or something. And he said, so we go to these things, and if I see a show that's, brilliantly written and it's got fantastic people in it and I love it, I make sure I don't invest in it.
Subsequently.
And if it's absolute rubbish, I put as much money as I possibly can. And as a consequence of which, I own part of Cats. I own part of
Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah, so he'd been...
And
these have been getting a huge return. But he said, every now and again I know someone in one of these shows and they're absolutely brilliant. My money stays firmly in my pockets.
There you go.
So that was the key.
Trust your instincts or not.
Yeah.
We're going to try something that we've tried once before with John Marsden. John Marsden had written a book called Everything I Know About Writing. Because we've got some writing students in the audience, get your pens ready. We're going to ask you to condense all the knowledge you have about writing in your particular genres into about 3 or 4 minutes. Here we go. I'm going to start with you, Bryan. I'm going to fire some words at you, and I want you to give me a 30-second, 45-second answer. Here we go. Character.
Take your time over them. Make sure that you put them in every possible situation you can think of. How would they behave there? What would they do here? How would they think there? What's their voice like? What do they have for breakfast? Write it to the point of tedium, and once you get there, keep going.
Structure.
Structure? Well, I'm not a person who knows about structure. I think you should have some. I definitely think you should have structure.
It's like fibre in your diet.
Is that like growing up, John? Is that like growing up? It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, everyone else should have some. No, look, of course.
You're not a plotter, you're a pantser, are you? You go by the seat of your pants, as Tony Jordan.
See, I don't know. I never studied writing. So I just make it up as I go along.
Voice.
Voice, very important. You've got to find, is it the voice of the writer or the The character you're asking.
The character.
Oh, the character. Absolutely. I think if you do all that other work, you'll find it. I don't mean accent, but you'll find the essence of who that character is. And after a while, when you can look at a telephone book and start reading out of it with the character as the character, then you know you've found it.
Pace.
Well, it's really important. Yes. And the question was? Pace. Yeah, I would always put pace in a book. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Beginnings.
You're a pace man, Brian.
I'm a pace man. Yeah, no, it's like once you start, you've got to keep going. Beginnings, I've always had one in all my things. Look, I wouldn't have a clue about it.
Where do you begin your story?
I'll tell you what, I do know one thing. I learned a great thing. John introduced me to Christopher Hitchens a long time ago, and we talked about writing essays and writing columns. I think I was about to write a column or something for someone, and John said, the best way you learn that, there's one way to learn how to write a column. How's that? He said, go and write one. And write one every week and you'll learn how to do it, which is absolutely true, and that's what happened. What Hitchens was very good at, and every good journalist is very good at, is your opening line. And the best opening line I ever heard in terms of political opening line was Hitchens, who said about Margaret Thatcher, an underclass is a wonderful idea, every ruling class should have one. It gives the middle class something to be terrified of, and the working class someone to apportion blame. That could have been Howard's Miracle. It could have been John Howard, the same stuff. Or the refugees, it's the same story. So you're going to want to read. You grab a paragraph, opening para like that, you're going to keep going.
Your condensed wisdom about writing satire, 30 seconds?
I think, look, if you want a life as successful and, John and I have quite a huge amount of wealth. Let's face it.
Fable.
We're only doing this for tax purposes, really.
You can tell from their shoes.
Get
that's
into
always
it.
the
No,
yeah.
I mean, it's a really dumb profession, really, in the end. I mean, you end up having goes at people who are going to rehire you. I mean, John and I don't even understand the word of repeat business because we never get asked back,
Well, the other thing about satire is that a satire isn't necessarily a thing.
No.
A satirical tone is something that can be applied. If you're going to write a satirical play, it better work as a play.
Yeah.
If you're going to write a satirical film, it needs to work as a film. So you can't just say, oh, that's a satire, that thing lying there. It needs to be something else. The satire is the thing that it's imbued with.
Do something.
Yeah. So you need to understand forms and so on, and something can have a satirical tone for part of its life and not for the rest, and you can have a play in which some characters are satirical and some are not. I mean, the MTC is about to do The Importance of Being Earnest with the marvellous Geoffrey Rush as Lady Bracknell, and if anybody goes to see it, you will see a play which is an absolutely brilliant play. Oscar Wilde wrote quite a few plays. The best play is The Importance of Being Earnest. It works better as a play, and that's one of the reasons that it's the funniest, because you relax when you see structure. You don't want to think these lines better work because the play's all over the joint. You want to go, oh, okay, I'm getting two things, great, or three things. What we tried to do with the games, for example, was shoot something that looked like a documentary, was played as a drama. It's got no laugh track, but it's supposed to be funny. But the audience is being trusted to find it amusing, but to find it amusing in any one of a number of different ways. Something could be sardonic, something could be jocular, shameless falling through revolving doors, anything, we'll do anything. But it's varied. Yeah, but it is varied, and people will find it. But it needs to work as a story in that case. Each episode needs to have a bit of a story, and that was sometimes the hardest thing in the writing, was to generate something that worked for half an hour as a story. The funny stuff, how much we can saw that off by the yard. Yeah. But how are we going to justify it? We've got to cheat somehow.
Woody Allen says that his films are just kind of trees that jokes hang off.
Yeah,
that's right. So I think the structure is important. And I mean, Milligan and other people who are essentially surrealists, their structure is excellent. In the case of the Goon Show, it's almost a character.
Surreal doesn't mean anti-structure.
No, I don't think so. And surreal means above real, so you need to know what real is. I think you'd argue that the Goon Show is a Second World War madness. show, and character is plot in it, because the essential plot is that how on earth did we win the war?
Excuse me, I notice that you're wearing a Cambridge tie.
I am, yes, wearing
Yes,
Cambridge.
you're up here in Cambridge?
Yes, I'm in Cambridge, yes.
Yeah, if you don't mind me saying so, you don't look like a chap who went to Cambridge. What were you doing here up in Cambridge?
Buying a tie.
Boom, boom. The Goons.
Yeah, well,
We like that one.
so I think if you're looking at something and you can't see the structure, the writer, and you're liking it, that's clever writing.
That's good.
Okay, that was my first one, structure. Next one, conflict.
Oh, conflict is always good, and I think it's often easier, rather than pointing at someone you want to find fault with and saying that person's fault is this, it's easier to be the person and not notice the fault. So if the conflict is in you, it's more easily observed by other people with fewer objections, because you're not demanding their attention.
That's a comic character, isn't it? Rather than a dramatic character. That's probably the seed of a drama.
That's right.
Audience.
Oh, I love the audience. I'm in the audience. I come from the audience. That's my training.
Milligan.
Milligan was a big influence of anybody of our age who works in our field. He was approximately my father's age. He was involved in the same war, and for part of it he was in the same part of the army, because the 8th Army was going up through North Africa and Italy. You remember that, Brian?
Yes, I remember it well.
And
It was hell.
and he is a brilliant user of the language. A simple example being that in the beginning of his first book of memoirs, a trilogy in which there were 5, he wrote the single line, "After Puckoon, I swore I'd never write another book. This is it."
Money.
In my own case, come from a family who sort of was totally opposed to borrowing as a result of the Depression and the war, and I have a relatively rudimentary attitude to money. I need the security of having something, but as long as I've got that, I'll just pull my foot straight off the accelerator.
I like a line I heard recently, you can keep the cheese, just let me out of the trap.
Yes.
It's a great one, isn't it?
Yeah.
The ABC.
Well, the ABC is...
I'll just be back in an hour, John.
The ABC is a very, very, very important institution in Australia, and public broadcasting is of the utmost importance. And if we needed proof of that, we look at private broadcasting. I think there are some problems with the ABC, like other ideas that we care about a lot, like education and all sorts of other things. So everybody was always trying to make them better. But I think there are certain things in Australia which can happen only on the ABC, and I don't think most people who dislike the ABC understand how important it is. The ABC, in terms of it's the only national network in television. Everything, Channel 9 calls itself a network. Channel 10 is Network 10. These are networks that go to wherever there are huge demographics. You get into the sticks, you won't see them. The ABC is seen everywhere. If you're on the ABC, we get letters from people... And people who listen to the ABC on radio, and the majority of the Australian population do. And like a lot of other public equity, I think people don't value it sufficiently. And I think, there are always problems with the ways that it's run. It could be run better, but, so could we.
Julia Gillard.
I think Julia Gillard's working her way through a colossal program, and I think she's... All the time, Tony Abbott's been standing on the sideline saying this won't work, that won't work, I'm opposed to everything in the universe. She's actually barrelling along, getting very, very big things done. I think their marketing is crap, and I don't think they explain things terribly well, but I think the media treatment of her is a sexist disgrace. And I think, the very unfortunate transition of power between Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. And I think the election was a bit of a circus, and the results got sellotape falling off it and bits of string and all that. But we've got what we've got, and we have to deal with it. And I think, we should wish the people the best in their endeavours. And Tony Abbott obviously has decided that his policy is to oppose everything. And that worked for a while. I think it might have got to the point where it stopped working. I noticed that Malcolm Turnbull started wearing leather jackets on television, which is a sure sign that the youth vote is up for...
Last one, golf.
Oh, golf is gorgeous. Golf is a mixture of Zen and physics. And it's a heavenly thing to do. I had no interest in golf until I was in my 40s, I suppose, and got to the point where I couldn't really do any other sports anymore. And I hit a couple of golf balls along the beach and thought, oh, I can see why people like this. And the President's Cup is on next week, and it'll be fantastic. Golf is just... When you hit a golf ball properly, it's like writing properly. It's very hard to get all the elements in the universe to be in the right place, but when they are, it's dead easy.
No. You're not going to stop there, are you, John?
No, that's right.
The only time, ladies and gentlemen, that you're going to see this man lose his temper is on a golf course.
Oh, yeah.
Nowhere else in the world. But I have to tell you a little golf story that John taught me how to play golf. That's it. Really. The first time I hit a ball was at Phillip Island. I can still remember because my arm's still aching. I tried to put it into orbit around Pluto. And John, what did you say to me? He said, no, Bryan, it's all about the swing. It's not about hitting it hard. And I went, OK, I'll try that, and sort of went out to the left and out to the right still, but I did get the swing happening a bit. Then we got about 3 fairways down, and John hit a ball behind these tall trees and dropped right in front of me. Now, only a lunatic would think he could possibly get through those trees to the other side. John walks up, instead of chipping back onto the green, stands back and goes, whack! Hits, drops at his feet. I said, John, you just pointed out to me at the beginning there, the whole idea is about rhythm and swing and whatever. And he said, I know. I said, I just noticed you tried to belt the shit out of that. And he said, yeah, he said, there's one thing I meant to mention to you, Bryan. Inside every male golfer is an 8-year-old that goes, go on, hit the bloody thing, you shit, go on. I dare you to hit it. That's how I learned golf.
Golf is very nice. It's a lovely thing.
It's good fun.
We've got to wind up in a few minutes. Can I go to a fairly large kind of question to kind of end the discussion with? Richard Flanagan, when he closed the Melbourne Writers' Festival, entitled his speech to the decline of love and the rise of non-freedom. And he said that he felt that we have a disease of conformity in Australia, and he was terribly worried about that. Are you fearful about the lack of imagination, the lack of caring, the lack of big ideas in Australia? And if you were going to give the speech that Richard had to give, where would you take us? What would be some of the themes that you think you'd want to explore?
Richard's a big ideas person and a person of great passion and intelligence. I think I sort of deal a bit more with scraps from the table, but I don't think there is a shortage of big ideas. I think ideas are not valued sufficiently in the public forum. If you think ideas are valued in the public forum, I suggest you look at Q&A, which is a program which could be used as a teaching tool and as an exchange of genuinely high-quality ideas, and it isn't.
It's a children's program.
It's sort of, Twitter or something, and it's a shame because they very often have people on there who including Richard, who was on there recently and was fantastic, and I'm not saying they're not individually fantastic, but we've got this silly idea, the ABC is very good at it, where they think balance is having Christ and Hitler on the same program.
Or Andrew Bolt. It doesn't really matter. Really.
And there's no such thing as balance. It's a bullshit idea. And I think there's something about that is anti the exploration of genuine ideas, but I don't think there's a shortage of them in this country, and lots of people are engaged, and I think this is one of the reasons why it's a great shame if the ABC starts tooling about with Radio National, is that really there are very few places left which are used for genuine discussions. And I find myself listening to the Science Show, for example, or something like that, and I'm absolutely profoundly ignorant about science. But by halfway through the discussion about the molecular structure of the onion or something, I'm bloody right with you, Robin. Go hard. I love it. It's very engaging, and that's what ideas are. And if you're not careful, you'll be engaged by a lack of ideas, which is dumb.
And it's cutting it down, isn't it? I mean, you're getting things now like on the ABC on television, on the program we're on, where they'll have, I remember one night they had Julian Assange on, and Lee Sales spoke to him for about 8 minutes and then said, this is, probably the most interesting person that's come along in 40 years. Said, you can see the rest of that interview on WW, wherever you go, whatever. What? I mean, if it's that interesting, why aren't you keep running it? And of course it's interesting. And do you really think that the bulk of your audience are now going to run to a computer and see the rest of that interview? Now, I don't know where this thinking's coming from, but it's dangerous, I think. And that's the thing that annoys me a lot about the ABC.
And Bryan, just to conclude, you travel a lot to the Middle East. You're very interested in Aboriginal reconciliation. You're closing the Melbourne Writers. What are the themes that you'd like to explore about the kind of people we are?
Bruno's referring to 3 trips to Syria and Jordan, and also this year to Iran. And what struck me each time I go there, and this time again, is we've lost the plot somewhere. Somewhere along the line, values that we had in this country are gone. And it's disturbing. It's disturbing because these places remind you what it was like when we had manners. And you open a door for someone says thank you. And there are little things, a whole lot of little things. I can't, just little things. But that thing of someone else being respectful, and I feel the respect is going here. And I don't know if we know who we are anymore.
Are we less caring and compassionate?
I don't think so. John always told this wonderful story about when Pauline Hanson came along and people said, oh, you know, Australians don't care anymore. And here's the rub, that Australians will give the shirt off their back to any colour, anyone, but they've got to be led in that direction. And Keating once said that Howard would fail the one tenet of Prime Ministership because he failed to take the people through the quagmire of race for fear of getting caught on a snag. One of the most beautiful things he ever wrote. Beautiful things he ever wrote. And what John was making the point is that if you stand up there and say, hey, this is not how we operate as Australians, or invoke that thing that is, you know, when there's bushfires and when there's floods, nobody cares whether they're black, yellow, or whatever. You just do it because that's what you do. And that's what I'm afraid that we've lost or losing. That thing of, that's us, that's who we are, you know, and I find increasingly that I don't know whether we're going to lose that or not, and I hope not.
Bryan Dawe, Mr. John Clarke, Julianne O'Brien. I like you. Could I just introduce Steve Pereira, who's our sponsorship manager, and he's the man who's responsible for the relationship with the Malthouse, and he's the one who got us the tickets for tonight. Would you welcome Steve, and he'll explain a little bit about the prize and our relationship.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bruno. I'll try and be as brief as possible. We've got tickets to Little Match Girl featuring the fabulous Meow Meow. Please go see it. It is a very fantastic performance. We've got a relationship with the Malthouse. All of you VU staffers and students, please check your globals. We give away free tickets all the time, and not enough people take them up. People from Melbourne, Deakin and Monash, sorry. I just want to, another thing, the Big West Festival, we're a big sponsor. It opens this Friday in the Park Across. The weather will be fabulous to go out. And a big VU showcase performance on the 26th at Kindred Studios. Please check the Big West website out for details.
We ready to go, gentlemen? Yep. Okay. Who's got the first question? We've got a microphone set up over there. I know it's a bit of a walk, but if you feel a bit shy, you can bellow it out and John or Bryan will reiterate the question. Who's going to go first? Beautiful. Go on.
John, your voice is quite resonant and the tone is interesting and humorous. What difference do you think it would make if Julia had your voice and you had hers?
Yeah.
I wouldn't work with him.
Yeah. Yes, the answer to that is a bit like the answer given by Gorbachev when he was asked how would the world be different if Kennedy had not been assassinated, and he said that he didn't think that Aristotle Onassis would have married Mrs. Khrushchev. But the voice thing is interesting observation, because one of the things Bryan and I do is we're voices, really. We're trying to unperform as in the traditional kind of physical sense, but there's quite a lot in voices, and because television and film are visual media, they're very often cast for looks, which is why people like Bryan and I don't get a lot of work. But voices are terribly important, and a lot of very good actors have fantastic voices. Geoffrey Rush is a good example. There are plenty of them. I remember working on a film a long time ago up in Queensland, and there was a young kid on it called Russell Crowe, and it was his first film. And there were quite a lot of other people in the film, and there were a lot of men in this film. It was an army film. And one of the people in the film was a guy called Donald Gibson, who was Mel's brother. And I remember sitting at a trestle table having lunch one day, and Russell said to Donald, how many cigarettes does Mel smoke? And he said, I don't know. And he said, well, think about it. Serious question. How many does he smoke? And he said, I've no idea how many he smokes. He said, well, bloody think about it. I mean, does he smoke 1 or 10 or 20 or 100 a day? And he said, why do you want to know this? And he said, I want the voice.
And he got it.
And I thought, you're smart. It's so important, and voices very often are more important than pretty well anything else in performance. It's where you can reveal things and hide things, and your face can say one thing and your voice saying. I think I rather like the voices. Then again, we grew up with radio, so we read voices.
It's also interesting when so many times it happens that people recognise you, not from television, but they hear your voice. A number of times I've had a taxi driver you'll be driving along and go, where do you want to go? And you say, oh, you're the joker from television with that idiot. What's his name?
Yeah.
Oh, that'll be Mr. Clarke?
Yeah.
Yes. And they spot your voice before they spot your look,
yes.
Which is very interesting. And, I mean, the best example that I ever heard was Citizen Kane, name of
Orson Welles.
Orson Welles, thank you. And the other film he did, not Citizen Kane, was the Fabulous Mastersons.
Oh yeah, the Ambersons.
Ambersons.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll get it right eventually. Had my back to it, and the film was on television, and then I suddenly realised that what he'd written actually was a radio play. And then they'd filmed it as a movie. But it was really a radio play. Because if you've seen the film, there's a lot of shouting and yelling and fighting over dinner and whatever. What he'd done was to choose the voices so they were never in the same
that's right.
level. They were all different. You'd have deeper, mid, high range. So you, without even watching this, you could distinguish the voices as you would in a radio play. Yeah,
and people who do impressions of other people are very interesting on voices, because a lot of people would do an impression. For example, when Bob Hawke was the Prime Minister, a lot of people did Bob Hawke, and they were all good, but they didn't all do it the same way. And so that's an interesting idea, that you can successfully replicate something in 9 different ways. And it's a fair observation. And the one I knew best was a guy called Jerry Connolly, and Jerry was trained in music, so his road in was music. And I remember he did Bob a number of times on projects that Brian and I were involved with, and I saw him doing Whitlam one night, and he was standing in the wings before he went on, and it wasn't the words that made his Whitlam impression work. The words were excellent, but it was the music, and he was standing in the wings beforehand going like this. And then he went out on stage and said, men and women of Australia. And it was all in the music. Another guy who did impressions explained to me one day, and you know, as people sometimes explain something to you and you realise it's right and you've never noticed it before, but you did know it. This guy said to me one day that Michael Caine breaks stuff up into groups of 3. So the way you do a Michael Caine impression is you break stuff up into groups of 3. He said, for example, I saw him in a film the other day, and he came to a door, and he knocked on the door, and his line was, they told me you'd give me a job. And Michael Caine said, they told me you'd give me a job. And until someone explains it to you, you don't know what... And a lot of what you do is rhythm, and maybe you're not conscious of your own rhythm or your own sound or something, but it is of the utmost importance. And in a way, on television, your voice is under the radar. People think they're looking at something, but...
Yeah.
And it's delightful to be able to do something on television. When the two of us are sitting there, there are limitations to the form we're using, and the limitation appears to be that there are only 2 of us. So in order to get somebody else in it, we can talk off to an imaginary person who's just, sorry, we've been interrupted. Hang on a minute, Brian, don't ask me. Sorry, what are you saying? So we can suggest to another person there. The phone can ring. There are a couple of other options we've got. And in all of those cases, you're inventing the voice when you watch it. You're not even sure what it is, but you've got it. And it's one of the reasons the Goon Show didn't work on television, is they put it on television and everyone went, no, that's not what Blue Bottle looks like. Get away. He's in here. It's delicious, all that.
Talking about Jerry Connolly doing Gough Whitlam, I was on a debate one night in Sydney with Jerry Connolly, myself as a character, and another guy doing Howard, and there was Whitlam, the fabulous David Longy.
Late of this world.
Yeah, and someone else. And Jerry was actually better at doing Gough than Gough. And Gough just sat there with the largest grin on his face when Jerry was doing Gough, in front of him, dressed up as the Queen.
We've got our second question from Bob Maguire.
Thank you, Bruno. You two are on the ABC, but to me you're preaching to the converted. How do we get people who watch Channel 7 and Channel 10 and all that, how do we get you guys on, or your equivalent on Channel 10? Or is that a pipe dream?
No, we were on Channel 9 for 9 years, and the irony was that we were on there for 9 years, so obviously the audience didn't have a problem with us. It's a question of...
It's a good question, because the danger, I mean, the impotence issue, if you like, is that we're doing exactly that, and that we're the band playing on the Titanic. And you'd like to think that either you're not entirely preaching to the converted, or that the converted at least need a laugh. They don't get any other joy in this world. But Brian's right, we did work on 9 for a long time, and the rules were very clear at 9, and we said to the people at Channel 9 at the time, basically, why have you hired us? And they said, well, look, here's the deal. The ratings we were on a Friday evening on a current affair, and it was run by Yarn Event, and they actually got Prime Ministers on, and they dealt with real issues, and it was intelligently done and so on. So it had a interesting sort of demographic. And they said, if the demographic in the second quarter hour of that program goes up, you guys are safe. If it goes down, you're dead. And we thought, it's, reasonably frank out here. And it went up. And I thought, well, this can't all be New Zealanders and friends of my mother.
Yeah. And people from Port Adelaide.
Must be some people from Port Adelaide. There must be something else going on. And we stayed there for quite a long time. And I found it quite an interesting time. And I've told this story before, so pardon me if you've heard it, but when we were in about week 5 of our time at Channel 9, and we were learning to do this was the idea we were trying to do, which is the idea we now do. This was the first sort of month and a half of it, and we noticed that standing in the studio every time we recorded was the company lawyer. And we thought, it's, reasonably disconcerting. So I said to him, why are you here? And is this going to be a feature of our recording, that we've got a floor manager and a company lawyer? And he said, yeah, it probably is. We're a very rich organisation, one of the richest in the country. We get sued from time to time. We don't want illegal action resulting from something you guys say. And I said, well, in that case, why don't you explain to me the libel laws? Tell me what you're worried about. It's not my intention to get sued. Help me. So he said, oh, okay, all right, well, what you mustn't call anybody a liar. That's the main don't do, is don't say someone is a liar. So I said, would it be possible for me to say something and for Brian to say, are you telling me the truth? And for me to say, can you repeat the question? And he said, yeah, it would be possible to do that. You're not calling someone a liar that way. The idea of the liar is in my head if I'm in the audience, but you're not saying it, so you can't be sued. And I thought, thank you, you've just had a genuinely great comic idea. It's much better to know what the rules are. And the rules in commercial television are, it's the quick and the dead out there, and it's refreshing in a way. The position that you're talking about is a position that applies to a lot of people. Our work is not unlike the work of a cartoonist, for example, and you could argue that that's the reason that people go to a Loonig cartoon, for example, is that not that they don't know what Michael is going to say, but they do know the sort of thing and they want it. And it's hard to argue that he shouldn't do it because people know sort of what it's going to be. But it is a hard one. I'd like to think that we're not completely intramurally wasting our time. Although, thank you for pointing it out.
Come up to the microphone, would you?
We can hear.
No, we can hear.
Just we can record the question. It makes sense.
There was a secondary reason for this.
If you wouldn't mind. Do we have another?
Yeah, no, he didn't tell us that we were being recorded.
Do we have another question as well?
Just on the plus side, you can do take 2.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed listening to you both this evening. You've spoken a lot about using traditional forms as a vehicle for exploring ideas, and you've talked about influences on your work which are very last century. I don't mean that. Yeah, I don't mean that.
As am I.
Right, as am I. But it occurred to me, you were talking about earlier on in the evening about how the ABC doesn't really know where it's going, and the whole media landscape is changing quite fast and quite dramatically. And I recalled that the last time I saw a sketch that you both had filmed was not on television, but it was on YouTube, on Facebook, which my son had shared, and it was hilarious, by the way. It was the one about world debt. Thank you very much. It was just exquisite and inane. I guess my question is about, given the changing landscape, what's the future for the work that you do, and how do you ensure your exposure?
Yeah,
Thanks.
That's a very good question. And I didn't mean before, in criticising the ABC for not knowing what it's doing, that it's very obvious to see what is happening in the world. I don't think it is obvious, and I think it's changing all the time, and it's quite dynamic out there. I just think the ABC should stop pretending that it does know. It's spent an enormous amount of money on a whole lot of its news and current affairs programs, for example, and we know a lot of people who work in there, and they're absolutely first-class, hard-working, diligent, experienced people. But it's being spread pretty thinly, and if they're not careful, the fact that a lot of people get their news and current affairs online is going to not benefit them, it's going to bypass them. In our case, the stuff that we do goes up on the ABC's various 9 million websites and things. We put it up on a Facebook site that we've developed ourselves, largely so that we can find out more about who's looking at it, so that we can have a more direct relationship with them, because we like a direct relationship with our audience, so we can tell what's getting hits. I mean, somebody last weekend, for example, we were mentioned in the New York Times magazine, and we had 10,000 hits in an hour and a half. And I think that's an example. And that won't happen with everything of ours. There are a couple of issues that are pan-national, principally the world economy and the environment. Anything we do on those subjects, my daughter pointed this out to me, I'm seeming to be wiser than I am, but young people notice this stuff. But she said, have you noticed that the things of yours that get the biggest hits are all about the international economic crisis or the environment, and they're not national issues? Yeah. Which is obviously true, and I hadn't noticed it before. So it doesn't happen with everything we do, but there'll come a time when, I don't know how...
I've tried.
There's a lighting issue.
Is there a switch down the back, Mark?
Yeah, it is. Everything's the ABC sooner or later. But I think that the question about how we cater our work, I think we're still in an environment where we would need a television outlet. The questions about making a living online are how you do what's called monetising online, and there are two ways principally. There's subscription, and we've always let our stuff go out for nothing, because if we're getting paid to do it in the first place, even though it's not much, it's easier and we like it if people like our stuff, so we let it all go for nothing, so we're not into subscriptions. There's the sale of goods or sponsorship, and I don't know how we would go with those things, but there will shortly be places which will set themselves up as sponsorship houses or something and encourage young people. I want to know what people who are 17 and 18 and 19 and 20 and 25 and 30 are doing, because they are not getting a go at any of the broadcasters I know anything about, and they didn't get a go when I was that age.
Yeah, John, but I think
it's bloody hard.
They're not watching television anymore.
I mean, a lot of young kids aren't watching television anymore at all.
They're on YouTube, or
I don't watch television. Why would they?
And that is not their first reference point. Newspapers aren't, whatever. No. So
I think soon there'll be things like book review websites and specific interest websites, like the Science Show and things like all those programs on Radio National that are specialist but amenable to a general readership. They will be websites in a minute, and they'll have sponsorship running out their ears, I reckon.
How to use your seniors card. How to get to Albury Wodonga free on Sundays.
We might have this as the last question too. We really have kept these gentlemen for a long, long time.
All right.
John, I want to thank you for saving me from a career in philosophy. I listened to the Fred Dawe tapes at a young age, and that saved me.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about Fred Dawe, the philosopher. Is he still alive and well?
Yeah, interesting question. I did a bit of philosophy at university, and my father-in-law was a philosopher, and I always thought, and I remember going, when I was a schoolboy, to the university open day, which we were all encouraged to do, sitting in a hall like this, and we were being spoken to by various people who said they were pitching for our business, I now realise, in marketing terms, but we just thought it was an interesting day out. And a professor of philosophy said, whereas the professor of geography had said, this is what we study in geography, this is what geography is, this is how the course works, this is what you'll need to do, here are some jobs you can do once you're a geographer, and all that sort of stuff. The philosophy professor got up and said, it's a bit hard to explain what philosophy is, but I'll give you an example of a philosophical question. If I have sugar in my tea and you don't, do I like my tea sweeter than you like your tea? Or do we like the same taste, but it takes me sugar to get the same taste that you get without sugar? And I thought, I better study this subject because
It's going to come in handy.
yeah, because it's good, solid, practical stuff that'll be useful all my life. And the university teaches humour, and its name is philosophy. So I did a bit of philosophy, and I did find philosophy very often very amusing. It was interesting. It was principally linguistic philosophy and all that sort of English tradition of philosophy at the time. But we also studied logic, which I found fascinating. And so when I was doing quite a lot of radio in those days, anything I knew anything at all about, I tried to transmute into material, because you need to write what you pretend to know, even if you don't know it. But also I think that I think philosophy ought to be a core course in a lot of things, because it's about how to think and how to reason and how to talk, how to explain, how to say exactly what you mean. One of the things I notice about the science show, for example, is that I very often think the quality of the language is good, because in science you need to explain what you mean. And in the arts, you can say any old bullshit in the arts a lot of the time, and
we do.
People stroke their, they think, oh, it's interesting. It's crap, but it's interesting. But I rather like it and I like all that playfulness that you have in the arts. I'm not arguing against the arts, but I do think there are various ways of using language, and in order to use any of them, you need to understand how it is used best or something, even if you're offering a variation on it. So my interest in philosophy was, I did have this wonderful father-in-law who was one of the funniest people I ever met in my life, and who was an absolutely fantastically high-quality Wittgensteinian philosopher. And God, he made me laugh telling me about Wittgenstein. There are some good Wittgenstein stories.
We need to go home. We've never stayed as late as this, and we'd like to stay forever. But would you please thank Dawe Clarke and Bryan Dawe?
Thank you all very much.
And because it's our last Rotunda for the year, could I just welcome Adam Hutter, who's our new head of department. I'd like to just thank some of our students and that. Good bloke to work for, and I think he really did see that a lot of people come to Rotunda and come for the first time. Could you please welcome Adam Hutter for a moment? Thanks.
Thank you, Bruno. I hope you enjoyed the Fluoro Disco show we've put on for you.
Yeah. Everything's got better since you took over.
It's magnificent. It's all part of the strategy. Yes. Yes, like Bruno said, a few quick thanks. The students that have been helping out this evening, and there are quite a few of them. Mark, who was on the door, Emmanuel, who was walking around before collecting the feedback forms. If you haven't done those feedback forms and you weren't part of the draw, doesn't matter if you want to still, please give us your feedback, that would be great. Guy and Daniel, who have been operating the equipment here, sound production students of ours. There are also a number of other students and staff involved in putting these events on. So Caleb and Petra, who performed before Caleb, as Bruno mentioned, Caleb studied the TAFE music course, went on to do a degree and is now studying his Masters out at Monash, which is fantastic. And also you would have seen copies of Platform on the table outside. Please grab yourself a coffee. There are student contributions inside, graphic design students who have worked on designing and laying out this magazine. Also the second year professional writing and editing students who edited the magazine as well. But apart from thanking our guests one more time in just a moment, I would also like to acknowledge the work of Bruno. As he said at the start, this is the 36th Rotunda, the 10th this year. I just think that's absolutely incredible. And it is great to see so many people here, and it is great to see so many new people here. And can you please tell all your friends, get on the Facebook page or pages, get connected and make sure that we can get people here and we can grow this incredibly important program. But thanks once again, Julianne as well, John and Brian, thank you very much for this evening. I found it tremendously mentally stimulating. And like I said before, all of that and a fluoro disco effect. It's just...